Hello everyone and welcome to the LAI Public Library Section online conference. Our conference has run from November 2020 and will run until April this year. Our overall theme is A World in Change, Libraries Survive and Thrive. Our online sessions are divided into the following headings. 1. Books, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. 2. Uncertain times. The reading bug is here to stay. 3. Wellbeing, mindfulness and resilience. 4. Shared reading in digital land. And 5. Our ever popular My Life in Book section. Today we are under our third heading of Wellbeing, Mindfulness and Resilience. And our talk is by Keith Gaynor on managing our mental health through the COVID-19 pandemic. Keith is an assistant professor in clinical psychology in the School of Psychology and a senior clinical psychologist in the Outpatient department of St John of God Hospital in Dublin. He specialises in cognitive behavioural therapy, CPD, and is taught regularly on cognitive behavioural therapy and mental health issues. He's written widely in academic journals on the topic of CBT and is a regular contributor to the Irish media on issues of mental health. His first book is now published and it's called Protecting Mental Health. His current research interests look at emotional regulation, psychosis, CPD, pilot mental health and loneliness. So enjoy our next talk, which is managing our mental health through the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
How do you do? My name is Keith Gaynor. I'm a senior clinical psychologist at St John of God Hospital and an assistant professor of clinical psychology in the School of Psychology, UCD. And I've been working for the last year nearly with people who've been struggling because of COVID-19, because of living through a pandemic, and because of our ongoing lockdowns. And so what I hope to do today is to talk a little bit about some of the things that might be difficult for us and some of the things that might be helpful. And so one of the things that's happened in this last year is that all of our health has been put at risk. It's been put at risk by the most basic things in our lives, by going to a restaurant, by meeting a friend, by going to the shops. And we suddenly had to think about these ordinary things, not in a way that might be safe or boring or exciting or fun, but it's somewhere where there might be risk and danger. And that's fundamentally changed things for us. We live in a social network. We live connected to other people. No man is an island. Each one is part of the main. And yet, COVID-19 has separated us. We now live in bubbles. We live through Zoom and screens where we used to talk, where we used to meet up, where we used to catch up. We live at 2 meters distance from people who are really important to us. We live at 2 meters distance just from people, ordinary people. And that was never how humans were built in our entire evolution. And it's not how we've lived through our entire lives. COVID-19 has chipped away at our own identities. When we think of our identity, we might think of our personality, who we are, how it's expressed, the different roles that we have or the different things that we do, the places that we go. And so many aspects of our identity has been forced to change. Our job, our role in the family, our time with our friends. And all of that can lead to a diminution in who we are, who we feel we are. We're a member of a family, but if we're not going around for Sunday lunch, that feels very different. We might be a sports fan, but if the sport isn't happening, or we barely see it, or we can't visit, then we don't feel like a sports fan in the same way. And we may be doing our job, but we're doing it from our bedroom or from our kitchen. We're doing it under pressure from homeschooling. And so it doesn't feel like our job. And so all these aspects that made us up have been taken away or chipped away at. There's been constant instability and unpredictability. So it's not the case that a year ago we got a new set of rules that we have to follow. It's that every 6 weeks or 8 weeks, there's been a change. There's been an adaptation. We have to keep thinking and rethinking and planning and replanning. And for humans, that's really, really difficult. We like to have a plan. We like to have a structure. We like to problem solve. But if we're not able to solve the problem, if we just have to endure, that's something that humans really struggle with. And so we don't know what's going to happen next for our jobs or our housing or our health or our family. And so we can't plan, we can't problem solve. Even though we see there's a huge difficulty, we're not able to fix it. And that's deeply stressful for us as people. Typically, when we look at anxiety management courses, they teach us that we're too anxious. We've become over anxious in some way. And the risks that we face are small. That if we're terrified of driving, that the risks of driving are actually minimal and that we can bring our anxiety down by going and doing these things. If we are fearful of flying, well, that actually most planes are safe and most situations are safe. But living through a pandemic, the opposite is true. We are living through a dangerous time. It's right to feel anxiety. If we weren't anxious at this, then what would we be anxious at? Equally, we've lost so much and so much of our normal lives. It's right to feel sad about it. If we didn't feel sad about this, what would we feel sad at? And so this is a real challenge for all of the normal tools that we use to manage anxiety, all of the normal tools we use to manage low mood. Over the last year, we can see that there's been an enormous impact on our well-being. So a University of Maynooth study looked at adults in the Republic of Ireland last March, April, and found that almost a third were either clinically depressed or clinically anxious. Similar study that looked at adults running from April to June last year found that almost 46% of them felt depressed. When the CSO looked at November, they found that 33% of people rated their overall life satisfaction as low. And that this compares, when you compare it to April, actually, it was worse. But when you look at November 2018, only 9% considered their life satisfaction as low. So it's an enormous change. And then when we look internationally, you'll see figures like between 25% and 44% of young people feel depressed. And those are over large samples. And so I think it's fair to say that practically everyone has been impacted in some way, and some people have been impacted in particularly difficult ways. When we look at that University of Maynooth study, that 1 in 4 people screened positive for generalized anxiety disorder or depression during the first week of lockdown 1. The risk factors were being younger, being female, having a loss of income, having had a COVID-19 infection, or a perceived risk, COVID-19 infection. And anxiety in particular was most present among older citizens. All of these things make a lot of sense to us. These are very reasonable reasons to feel anxious or to feel low. When we think about how we were working, so this is CSO data, that looks at how, for April 2020, that when we look at, let's say, age groups 25, 35, 45, that between 30 and 40% of people started at home working in those months. And equally, 10, 20, 15% of people ended up doing more hours. So our work lives utterly changed. We were suddenly working not in offices and businesses, that have been set up to work, but on our knees, on couches, and at kitchen tables, and often while homeschooling. And so these things are deeply stressful for us because we're trying to achieve the normal things that happen in work. But one of the things about so many people working at home is a real indicator of how isolated we become. We were separated from our colleagues, we were separated from our friends, and often separated from our families. And so there's consistent evidence going back 20 years that loneliness, that isolation, can cause an increase in pain, increase in stress, and lowers the immune system. We are social as a species. We work in couples and in families and in tribes and villages and cities. Very few of us are monks on the side of a mountain. We don't do well when we're alone and isolated. We know that if we've had any previous mental health difficulties, that isolation is a real risk issue for relapse. We know that often, as we feel more lonely, we withdraw because our motivation goes down, because meeting people feels risky, as well as the real risk from COVID-19. And so these data are all pre-COVID, but that loneliness increases the likelihood of depression by 15%. And equally, being depressed increases the likelihood of being lonely by 10%. Loneliness increases the likelihood of experiencing social anxiety by 13%. But being anxious about social interactions increases by being lonely by 9%. And although we don't have similar data for the last year, it's imaginable that actually this is the same or worse. Martin Buber, the Israeli philosopher, defined human beings as you-word. I'm intrinsically you-word. I'm oriented towards the other person. That there is something innate in me that is pointed towards other people, for good, for ill, getting on or not getting on. I am affected and connected to the other person. What happens then when we're all in our bubbles? When we don't see our neighbours, colleagues, friends, and families? Something fundamentally gets separated in us. Nadine Ferris, French, a very interesting person. She works in the Irish Global Health Network. And so she has been looking at the impact of COVID across the whole world. And so while we talk about NEFIT and we talk about government policies and level 5, she's been thinking about how people have been managing in Taiwan or in Tanzania. And she noticed 4 major themes: resilience, solidarity, creativity, and community. People have been amazingly resilient. Although I've highlighted some of the difficulties with mental health, the other side of that is actually 75% of people have managed an international pandemic. They haven't managed it easily. It hasn't been fun. Their enjoyment in life has decreased, but they have managed. There's been incredible solidarity shown by people. This has been shown by hundreds of thousands of workers in different professions: healthcare, education, transport, tens of thousands of people going into, work in shops, work in all the things that make up our society. We've seen enormous solidarity. We've seen it in all the people not doing things, not visiting, not going, even though they did really need it want it, would love it to happen. Lots of the conversation here has been about travel at Christmas. But the thing about the travel at Christmas was hundreds of thousands of people didn't come. Most people stayed where they were. Their solidarity was shown by not going. There's been incredible creativity on individual levels as people have adapted the way they work and the way they interact. On artistic levels, as people have moved out of the galleries and onto the beaches, and people are painting paving stones and beach rocks and putting out into the world the things that they're developing. And how we've made sure the society has kept going. And that creativity has been amazing. And community. That we'll know, we'll read in the paper if a house party has happened or if there's been a rave somewhere. But we won't read about the thousands of people who deliver shopping for their neighbours because it's small, it's individual. Often only two people know about it, the neighbour and the person who's doing the act of kindness. And that's happening everywhere. It's happening in lives all around us. It's happening in our streets, in our town. And there's been extraordinary resilience, solidarity, creativity, and community. The shadow side of that is there's been vulnerability, divisiveness, stuckness, and isolation. And those things are hard. And they impact us, and they chip away at our well-being. And so, in two areas, I've been working with this model of COVID-related anxiety and depression. In my clinical work in the hospital, I've been meeting people since last summer who've had anxiety and depression directly related to living through a pandemic. And we noticed all the risks that have been highlighted by the research in people's stories. The risk of isolation, people trying to protect their physical health, but ending up very isolated and alone. The health risk, that people perhaps with underlying health conditions or older people have been very frightened by the risk to their well-being. The loss of identity, where we move from being a social person who interacts with everyone in the office to being someone who works entirely alone. Or the financial and practical risk. We know that more than a third of people have lost employment because of COVID. We know that there's a huge loss of income for tens of thousands of people. We know childcare has been an enormous difficulty for people trying to work and people in all sorts of situations. And we know the difficulty homeschooling has brought. And all of these have impacted people's mental health vulnerability. And there'll be many people I would have seen who I don't think ever would have come to a mental health service if it hadn't been for these issues. Then, once that vulnerability has been triggered, it's my impression that 6 different things have happened. There's been a huge amount of negative emotion, anxiety, sadness, a feeling of loss, often feelings of loneliness. Physical anxiety, so tension, headaches, sickness, poor sleep. Lots of people carry beliefs about the threat, COVID-19. They very much believe that they are really at risk, even when their front door is closed. They can feel like they'll never get better, even though there's lots of evidence that they will manage and cope. They can hold negative beliefs about their family and friends, and negative beliefs about the future. Lots of people do lots of things to keep themselves safe, but also lots of people have become stuck. And so even though they mightn't see their friends for coffee, to protect themselves, they stop seeing their friends through Zoom, and they get stuck in an isolated behaviour. Rates of worry are really high, and people have spent long periods of time worrying about different aspects of COVID, even though as ordinary people we have very little chance to change any of these things. We can't make vaccines come quicker, or we can't make government policy. And because the pandemic has been such a changing scenario, people have had to make lots and lots of decisions, which is intrinsically anxiety provoking. Should I meet a friend for a walk? Should I visit a family member? Should I go inside the house, outside the house? Should I wear a mask on the path? Should I wear the mask in the park? What time should I go to the park? These may seem very small, but they load up and load up and load up, and they become mentally exhausting. And so one of the things to think about is that lots of these things aren't going away. These are going to be ongoing issues. There may well be an issue with the recession economically. There may well be a level of anxiety even when we've all received the vaccine. There may well be ongoing health risks for all of us or some of us. There's likely to be ongoing financial pressure for many people. And there's likely to be ongoing child and family issues for many people as well. And so some of these risk factors in terms of mental health will continue even as our physical health prospects improve. So what I'd ask you to do is to talk through with me 7 things that we can do to mind our own mental health. And lots of people will have heard these before. Lots of them are self-evident. The difficulty is keeping going. A year in, still doing these things. A year in, not getting stuck in the rut, not letting the good things stop. And now we have every right to be tired, but it mightn't help us. And so the first one on the list is trying to maintain any social connection we can. And that's talking over the hedge to neighbours, that's keeping up phone calls, that's writing letters, sending emails, keeping the Zoom calls going. And they may be tiresome, and it might be difficult to ask people what's been happening in their lives when you know nothing has been happening. But really trying to keep that social connection in any way you can. Moving our bodies. Often we had no difficulty getting our 10,000 steps in. But now, when we live between our kitchen and our front room, actually maybe getting 100 steps in would be a challenge. But one of the things we know about depression and anxiety is that they're embodied. We carry them through tension and through sickness. And so if we can move our body through walking, through Pilates, through yoga, through stretching, through anything that allows those feelings of anxiety to dissipate, then we'll feel better. We can spend many hours a day worrying, and yet it won't fix the difficulties that we have. And so trying to make a commitment not to worry, that we will spend less time worrying. We don't expect that to become zero, but actually that the worry doesn't help us. And so if COVID numbers go up, they go up. Our plan stays the same. If COVID numbers go down, COVID numbers go down, but our plan stays the same. And trying to focus on all the things in our lives where real joy exists. And that's often music, art, books, people. As we move out of lockdown, we're going to have some issues with anxiety. It'll be very strange to be in a crowded shopping centre again. It'll be very strange to be in a crowded office. And so we're going to be aware that our anxiety is a natural response to being in what will be a new situation for us, having been a year separated. And so just being aware, being kind to ourselves, but gradually moving towards normal life. Recognizing the beliefs that come up. And often these beliefs are so deep down, we would prefer to talk about any level of inverted commas news rather than our own fears and beliefs. People have a belief that I will die or my loved one will die, even though those people may be very safe. There's something important about naming and understanding and really holding those beliefs compassionately, but not allowing them to determine our mood and our well-being. Looking at our behaviours, have we got stuck? Have we got caught in a rut? What can we add that might bring a little joy, might bring a little solace? And that a year in, it's every chance we've used up all our original coping. And we're going to have to find something new. We're going to have to find creativity. And decision fatigue. It's hard. Do I wear the mask or not? Do I go or not go? And just being very kind to ourselves and recognizing that these daily decisions and weekly decisions wear us down, and doing our best to manage. And so we can think about the triggers of our anxiety. So what is it in my life that makes me more anxious? The school run, or the in-laws who still hug, or the neighbours who don't socially distance. I'm trying to manage those triggers specifically. Minding our bodies. Anxiety and low mood is in the body. It's a natural bodily response. So we can mind our body. If we're carrying adrenaline around with us, we feel worse. We know we're sitting more, we know we're eating more, we know we're drinking more. And so anything that alleviates that will be helpful. At its most basic, just breathe. Slowly, calmly, and then breathe again. Thinking about our worries, not getting lost in them, not getting carried away in them, but thinking about the things that make us frightened. And write them down. Trying to get a grip on them, trying to get control of them, not allowing our mind to spin off. And when you write them down, notice how few there are. It's the same few worries that keep coming up. And notice that once we have a little bit of control, then it's easier to manage. We have to try and protect our identity. That if we're a hurling fan, but there's no hurling, how do we hold on to that? Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to replay old games with? Who do we need to talk to about selections and team strategies with? If we're a music fan, how do we hold on to music with no gigs? And this is where creativity is called on, but trying to hold on to those bits of our identity so that we don't lose them. Reducing the amount of time we spend thinking about COVID. We don't need to listen to every newscast. We don't need to watch every news. We don't need to read every paper. A basic level of knowledge will keep us safe. We can focus on everything else. We can focus on all the things that bring us joy. And so that COVID-19 only takes up the minimum of our brain space. This will take a commitment, but we can do that. Doing everything we can to keep connected. People are the risk. That's how the virus transmits. But them trying to find every other way we can of meeting, seeing, and talking to each other. And so I'd ask you to mind yourself. We will move through this. It will be as hard on the mind as it has been on our bodies. And if you can look after you and one other person, then we'll get through. Thank you very much.